皆さんこんばんは。本日はお集まりいただきまして誠にありがとうございます。国連開発計画 UNDP 駐日代表事務所で障害と広報を担当しております安田と申します。どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。これより人間開発報告書2020新しいフロンティアへ人間開発と人新世発表会を始めさせていただきます。UNDP は1990年からほぼ毎年人間開発報告書を発行してきました。その中では開発の目的を経済成長だけではなく、人々が人間の尊厳にふさわしい生活ができるように手助けすることであると位置づけ、人間中心の開発を掲げてきました。また開発の度合いを包括的に測るため、所得、教育、健康の水準を基本要素とする人間開発指数を導入しました。以来報告書は毎年、時代の一歩先を読む様々なテーマを設定して、人間開発のあり方を問題提起し、国際社会に新たな視点を提供してきました。今日ご紹介する2020年版、新しいフロンティアへ、人間開発と人新世は30周年の記念版となります。人新世とは人類が初めて地球の生態系や気候などに大きな影響を与えるようになった、つまり人中心の時代という新たな地質学的時代を指します。人間と地球がこの新たな時代に突入する中、共に繁栄する道のりを再設計する時が来たと報告書は呼びかけています。本日はコンセイソン人間開発報告室長が報告書の重要メッセージを皆様に直接お伝えいたします。また、この議論を発展させるべく、国際協力機構 JICA ガバナンス平和構築部平和構築室長の室谷龍太郎様をお迎えし、人間開発と持続可能性、さらに人間の安全保障の関わりについて対話します。開会に先立ちまして、同時通訳の機能についてご説明いたします。スクリーンの下の方に地球儀のような形をした通訳というボタンがございます。そちらをクリックしていただけると言語が選択できるようになっています。日本語の通訳をお聞きになりたい方は日本語を選択してください。なお、オフの状態を選択されますと通訳がない状態となり、日本語の発言は日本語のままに、英語の発言は英語のままに聞こえます。また本日は終わりの方に質疑応答の時間を設けております。質問やコメントがある方は、Q&A というボタンからぜひ入力をお願いいたします。英語でも日本語でも結構です。質疑応答の時だけではなく、プレゼンテーションの最中など、いつでも質問をお寄せください。それでは開会にあたりまして、外務省国際協力局地球規模課題総括課長の吉田綾様よりお言葉をいただきます。吉田さん、よろしくお願いいたします。
はい、ありがとうございます。良き友人であるコンセイソン室長、2020年版の人間開発報告書の完成に敬意を表します。そして、近藤所長、このタイムリーかつ意義深い報告書の日本での公表に際し、ご挨拶の機会をいただきまして、心よりお礼申し上げます。UNDP のフラッグシップレポートであるこの人間開発報告書は、1990年に初めて発行されて以来、毎年異なるテーマのもとに人間開発の在り方を問題提起をし、様々な切り口で分析を行うことにより、国際社会が直面する諸問題についての議論をリードしてきました。人間開発報告書はこれまで取り上げてきたテーマの中でも、特筆すべきなのは、1994年版人間開発報告書が、人間の安全保障という概念を国際社会において初めて公に提唱したことです。個人の保護と能力強化により、恐怖と欠乏からの自由、そして一人一人が幸福と尊厳を持って生存する権利を追求する考え方、この人間の安全保障の概念は、日本外交の重要な柱として位置づけられています。現下の新型コロナウイルス感染症の拡大はまさに人間の安全保障に対する危機であり、日本政府としては、この概念の生みの親ともいえる UNDP と連携して、この危機を乗り越えるための具体的な施策についての議論を深めていきたいと考えています。 さて、今年の報告書です。人類はこの新型コロナ感染症拡大の危機の下で、気候変動や生物多様性の喪失、環境劣化という地球の危機にも直面しています。この危機に対処できるのか、それとも変革に失敗し、地球とともに滅びてしまうのか、これが今年の報告書の問いだと思います。しかもこれは人類の生活が豊かに発展してきた帰結として生じた課題でもあります。従来開発の課題は、国際社会の発展というパイ全体のうち、どれだけの分け前を各国が享受するのかという課題として捉えられてきたと思います。しかし、この報告書が述べるように、今人類はパイを焼くオーブンそのものが大丈夫なのか、心配しなくてはならない状況になっています。今年の報告書が環境負荷についての検討をテーマにしているというお話を耳にしたとき、私は今年の報告書がその処方箋を列挙したものになるんだろうと想像をしていました。しかし、私の事前の予想は良い意味で裏切られました。今年の報告書は個別の処方箋を示すことではなく、人間開発の全体像から見たときに、地球の持続可能性を維持するために必要な社会変容のメカニズムを示しています。報告書はまたこうも述べています。解決策と実施の二分論ではない。すなわち、報告書は分野ごとにサイロ化された処方箋ではなく、システム全体を変えていくことの重要性を強調し、実践し、行動に取り組んでいくこと、イノベーションを起こすこと、そういったことの重要さにも言及しています。なぜこんな議論になっているのだろうかと考えたところ、こう書かれていました。今年の報告書はその答えとして、人間開発の原点に立ち戻って、人間開発とは人々の自由を拡大し、自身に合った発展のために選択肢を広げることであり、ある一定の決まった道筋を描くことではないと述べています。その上で地球を守ることと人間の発展を追求すること、この2つは二律背反ではないと述べています。そういった意味で、今年の報告書は地球を守るための処方箋が書かれた教科書ではありません。むしろ報告書を読んで、日本を含む各国の人々が持続可能性を重視しながら、自国の発展の道筋と方法を選択して、社会を変革していくことができる、そのメニューを提示していて、その中から何を目標として、何を選択し、何を実践するのか、その自由を我々は持っているということだと思います。そして社会変革の鍵は、変革につながるメカニズムをいかにうまく作り上げることができるかにあります。サイロに陥らないで、政府や企業、市民社会、アカデミア、一人一人を含むシステム全体が変革へのインセンティブとイノベーションで社会変容につながっていく。社会全体のアプローチに基づくメカニズムが重要だというこの報告書の結論は、私自身非常に同感しているところです。パリ協定が2015年に採択をされて5年が経ちました。今年1月、アメリカでは新しい政権が発足をしました。昨年、菅総理は2050年カーボンニュートラル宣言を行いました。政府だけでは持続可能な経済は作れません。そのための変革は政府だけでなく、社会全体が実現していかなくてはなりません。一方でこの宣言は政府の役割として社会が向かうべき方向性を示し、社会変容を促していく良きリーダーシップであると私は考えています。最後に本日のディスカッションで持続可能性を追求した新しい発展の形、日本が、そして世界が取るべきアプローチについて意義深い議論がなされることを期待しております。ご清聴ありがとうございました。
どうもありがとうございました。それでは続きまして、UNDP 人間開発報告室長、ペドロ・コンセイソンより報告書の重要メッセージを発表いたします。では、ペドロ、よろしくお願いします。
Thank you, Yuko. Thank you, Director Ayo Yoshida, for your kind words, for the great collaboration, even before I joined HDRO. And as you indicated, my aspiration is to continue to work closely with Japan as we explore further the concepts of human security, human development, and work not only with the government, but also academia, civil society, and with many colleagues in Japan as we continue to take forward this journey of human development reports. As Yuko mentioned, this was a journey that started in 1990. So this 2020 Human Development Report that I'll be presenting today and that I look forward to discussing in a little while with Ryotaro and Tetsuo is special because it's the 30th anniversary edition of the report. Yuko mentioned that first report 30 years ago, over 30 years ago now, introduced the concept of human development, which is essentially referring to the idea that development is about expanding capabilities, that is the ability of people to be and do what they value and have reason to value. And it also, as Yuko mentioned, proposed a metric to account for this basic set of capabilities, the Human Development Index. Now, this was not meant to be a measure that would refer to human development in a comprehensive way, but really to capture a set of basic capabilities in standards of living and basic achievements in health and education. And this year's report, or the last year's report, the 2020 Human Development Report, opens with a wonderful text by Amartya Sen, paying tribute to the visionary leadership of Mahbubul Haq in formulating both the concept of human development as well as the Human Development Index. So I would invite you to, as you read the report, to pay special attention to that wonderful text. Now, I should also confess that it was not an easy report to produce. The disruptions of COVID-19 were unique in 30 years of producing human development reports. But perhaps what made it more difficult was the question of whether, amidst all the suffering of COVID-19, the world needed yet another report. In fact, the team throughout the year supported UNDP's work in the response of COVID-19 in many ways, including in trying to assess and quantify the impact of COVID-19 on human development. But we know that the COVID-19 tragedy has not displaced concerns over climate change. I know, Director Yoshida, you're close to concerns over climate change given your previous roles in the Japanese government. And last week, UNDP actually released a survey that showed that people, over 2/3 of people around the world, this was the largest ever survey conducted on climate change, remained concerned over climate change. So the 2020 HDR is really an invitation to look at challenges such as COVID-19 and the climate emergency, not as separate problems really, but as reflections of an unprecedented moment in our history and the history of our planet. And so we became convinced as we were working on the report that it was important to present this perspective, that we are really facing a unique moment when human pressures on the planet are driving dangerous planetary change. Dangerous because it is harming us, people, and all life on planet. Now, this unique moment has been described as a new geological epoch, the Anthropocene, and it's characterized by an emergence of an unprecedented set of risks that result really from the fact that, as the Secretary General of the United Nations put it last year, from the fact that humanity seems to be waging a war on nature. In the case of COVID-19, it's very likely that the virus jumped from animals to humans. It's not fully established, but we do know that the frequency of this kind of so-called zoonotic diseases that have origins in animals and then jump to humans has increased in recent years. And furthermore, we do know that this increase in the frequency of these diseases is a direct result of these planetary pressures. So the 2020 Human Development Report is not so much a report about sustainability or environmental concerns as such, but rather one that attempts to reflect on what is the meaning of expanding human development as we go deeper into this new context, unprecedented reality of the Anthropocene. So I want to briefly cover 3 key points from the report. First, to say a few more words about the challenge then how the report invites us to reconceptualize or rearticulate the goal of human development. And then finally, some ideas on the way forward. As Director Yoshida, the report is not very specific on direct recommendations, in part because it's difficult to do so in a global report, but it does provide some very clear articulations of possible way forward that hopefully will engage governments, policymakers, but also decision makers in the private sector, leaders in civil society, and people at large, all of us, given the choices that we can make individually and together. So let me start with the challenge. The challenge is that we are not only facing a new type of risks, but that these risks are actually superimposed in a world with large and often growing inequalities. And these inequalities are exacerbated by these risks. So if we take COVID-19, we know, for instance, that the impact, the economic impact at least, has been far worse for women than for men, in part because women are overrepresented in some of the economic sectors that have been more affected, but also perhaps more troubling because social norms related to the expected role of women in homework and childcare seem to be reasserting themselves. So we see that many women around the world have pulled back from the labor force. In our report, we document drops of as much as 10 percentage points in the labor force participation of women. And this represents a reversal in progress that actually had taken decades to achieve. But actually, this pattern holds more broadly. If you see on this slide, countries that face ecological threats represented on the horizontal axis, so this refers to droughts, floods, storms, are also those where gender inequality is higher. But if we look at inequality in human development, so not only gender inequality, but in human development as a whole, we see that the story is very much the same. Now, inequalities are also linked to the drivers of dangerous planetary change, in part because there are huge asymmetries, huge gaps in consumption, but also in power between those that over-extract and over-pollute and those bearing the consequences and the costs. For instance, the report shows that by the end of this century, the poorest countries in the world will have contributed the least to climate change, could experience up to 100 days more of extreme temperature. As you see on this slide, the low human development countries on the left-hand side of the slide could experience up to 100 days more of extreme temperature, while rich countries on the very right, which are actually the ones that have historically contributed the most, could experience 18 days less. But the report also shows that this is not inevitable and depends on our choices. So now you see that the blue lines represents what would happen were we to meet the aspirations of the Paris Agreement on climate change. So those 100 days of extreme temperature could actually be cut in half if we were to take actions leading up to meeting the Paris Agreement on climate change. So this takes me to the second point that I wanted to highlight, the goal. And so the goal of advancing human development clearly remains vital, but we argue that it should now be supplemented by also being mindful of the planetary pressures, of the pressures that we're putting on our planet. Because otherwise the very notion of human development for many today, as we see from the data that I just showed, and perhaps for everyone in the future, we will be foreclosed. In fact, if human development is to a large extent about expanding choices, these choices are already being narrowed today. So in the 2020 Human Development Report, we supplement the HDI with a new index of planetary pressures that combines indicators of material footprint per person and carbon dioxide per capita. So if we plot the current values of these two indicators on a graph, as I'll show now, we see that the aspirational space of high human development and low planetary pressures, this green triangle that is flashing here on the screen, is currently empty. Now, advancing human development is not only about people's well-being, and Yuko has already emphasized this point, which is central. It's about giving people conditions to make different choices. Human development is about seeing people agents of change. Amartya Sen uses this expression that from a human development perspective, we should look at people not as patients, but as agents, as able to make different choices. But there's actually currently a gap between, for instance, worries about climate change. I alluded to the survey that UNDP released last week, and the values that we hold. Nobody wants to live in a polluted world or in a world where we are destroying rivers, oceans, and life. But there's a gap between all of these values, all of these concerns, and action. And so this brings me to the last point on the way forward. And the report lays out, as Director Yoshida said, 3 mechanisms of change. So these are meant to enable and encourage people to make different choices that in a way can serve as bridges between values, concerns, and action. And once again, they are not directed at specific actors, even though we have to recognize that governments and policymakers have a special responsibility, but they are really meant, these mechanisms of change, to appeal to and hopefully lead to engagement also with decision makers in the private sector, civil society, and all of us individually and collectively. So the first mechanism of change is about harnessing social norms. Now, much policy analysis is still premised on this idea that each person is an island making rational calculations on how to behave. But actually, we know that humans are an ultra-social species. And the key predictor of what people do, the people's behavior, is what others around them do and what individuals believe others expect them to do. I was always struck when I visited Japan to see so many people wearing masks. And I never initially understood why, but then I was told and educated that it's actually a social norm that when someone is not feeling well, to protect the others, there is an expectation that a person will wear a mask. Now, this social norm is now spread around the world in the context of COVID-19. And we know that they can actually change quite rapidly, the social norms. So we must now seek to harness social norms that give greater weight to easing planetary pressures. And the report to emphasize in particular the role of education, and here education broadly understood as important to enhance both a sense of stewardship for nature, but also the ability to enable people to have critical thinking that is essential for reason, public, and individual deliberation. The second mechanism for change does appeal to rational calculations because they do take place in our market economies. So prices and regulation, we know, can be used to shift economic incentives. Now, we know that instruments like carbon prices, phasing out of fossil fuel subsidies are examples, but the report emphasizes actually the importance of incentives and investments in research, technology, and innovation. This is not to downplay the importance of existing technologies. For instance, many existing energy technologies are now competitive economically with fossil fuel-based energy sources and could be deployed at scale with stronger incentives. But actually, as important or even more importantly, the report emphasizes the relevance of incentives and investments in research to harness what has been called our collective brain, to continue to expand the frontier of knowledge. In fact, we know from history that any specific technological fix, any wonderful technology, may seem and may actually resolve problems, but may also bring about unintended consequences. As an example, the use of CFCs that enabled at the beginning of the 20th century a revolution in refrigeration that changed the way in which people consumed food systems around the world was really a miracle, but in a way also led to the depletion of the ozone layer, as we found out towards the end of that same 20th century. And in a way, that's the story also of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels were a miracle technology, really, that enabled us to move from agricultural to industrial societies. But we do know that we are now confronting a challenge related to climate change. Finally, third, and I'll conclude, looking at nature, less as a constraint, but actually as a potential opportunity to advance human development by protecting and restoring ecosystems. Our UNDP administrator, Achim Steiner, often speaks of what he calls the ecological infrastructure. So not only the physical infrastructure, but also the ecological infrastructure upon ultimately not only opportunities, but our lives depend upon. Examples here include, for instance, the blue economy, investing in ocean ecosystems that can provide for huge economic opportunities, and also ways of advancing human development. And I'm sure Japan knows this very well. So let me conclude by just highlighting once again this key idea that the report suggests that social imbalances, inequalities are putting people and planet on a collision course, but it doesn't have to be that way. We can make different choices, and our aspiration is that with the 2020 Human Development Report, we will help and contribute to signposts on how to continue to advance human development while easing planetary pressures, moving us towards meeting the aspirations of the 2030 agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. それでは続きまして、人間開発と持続可能性、人間の安全保障の関わりについてのダイアログです。コンセイソン室長と対話するのは、JICA にて企画部国際援助協調企画室長を務められ、今月よりガバナンス平和構築室長に就任された
Conversation will be talking with Mr. Ryutaro Munitai, who has position as Senior Director, Head Office for Global Issues and Development Partnership, and now from this February assuming the role of Senior Director, Office from Peace Building and Reconstruction.
失礼いたしました。通訳さん、すみません。音声が若干かぶっていますでしょうか。はい、モデレーターは UNDP 駐日代表の近藤哲生が務めます。なお、ダイアログは英語で行いますので、日本語でお聞きになりたい方は通訳ボタンから日本語をご選択ください。それではよろしくお願いいたします。
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Pedro, for your great presentation. That was very clear to everyone to understand how this human development report specifically aiming at talking to the people, what we have to have in mind. Now, I have also a very familiar person who is working very closely with UNDP from JICA, Ryutaro Murotani-san, who has been in the coordination with the international organization with UNDP, but now moved to a peace building department of the JICA. I think I would just invite Murotani-san to introduce yourself. And then your kind words, please.
Thank you very much, Kondo-san, and thank you very much for the UNDP team and the UNDP Tokyo office to invite me to speak on this important occasion. I am particularly happy to join this conversation because Pedro and the UNDP team and myself and the team of JICA have been discussing a lot of times on how we can apply the human development concept as well as human security concept in today's context. And I think we have been, UNDP, I understand, is reviewing the human development concept on its occasion of the 30th year anniversary. On our side, JICA, when we had 25th anniversary of human security back in 2019, we started revisiting the human security concept in today's context, how we can upgrade or update our approach toward achieving human security in today's context, and how we can improve our operations on the ground. So I think we are trying to do the similar things, and I think we have been learning a lot from each other. So I think today's opportunity would be very, very important and exciting for me. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much, Murotani-san. So now I also invite Pedro to show a little bit your face. Thank you very much. So we heard at the beginning Ms. Yoshida, who was very clear about the role of the government. The government cannot solve everything, but point the direction, how to capture the problem, and then the government play a leadership role to facilitate the people to move forward to that direction. I think that is a very important message. And then Pedro's point on the three suggestions, especially the one of the question already we have in our Q&A box about the role of the education. How can we involve the children in our education for the future? And so that will be on the table to discuss today, and that maybe others are coming. First of all, Murotani-san, thank you for your generous presence today. And then having read this report, what is your main takeaway if the JICA will take into account from this suggestion and then the findings from the report? Yutaro-san.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much. And I would first like to congratulate Pedro and your team to successfully complete this important but very challenging topic of Human Development Report 2020. And first of all, I think it's a very good, I think you made a very good success in linking today's challenges, which is a COVID-19 crisis, with our longer-term challenge of climate change, by introducing the concept of this Anthropocene. Because I think the COVID-19 is giving us a challenge that we have to shift to a new normal to be better prepared for the pandemic. But I think the climate change is also pushing us to transform our society, to have a new normal, to be friendly to the planet. So when we talk about the building back better in the context of the COVID-19, in many countries, particularly in Europe, we are talking a lot about the building back better and greener. So I think this is a right moment that we have to transform our society for a better and a greener society. And I think it's the right moment for making a good policy choices. So I think we are extremely happy to see the HDR 2020 giving us some options or guidance towards improving our societies to be more planet friendly in thinking about furthering human development. And I think the human development and human security, both concepts are people-centered, but they have to be planet-friendly as well. So I think I really commend Pedro's work in reconciling these two ideas. And secondly, I think your effort in the 30th anniversary of Human Development Report is just to is one of the efforts to revisit and redefine the human development. And as we are trying to revisit the human security concept, we also understand the global environment or the climate crisis is one of the most important agenda which it wasn't as serious as today back in 25 or 30 years ago. So I think that this is the right topic. And as I am echoing Yoshida-san on the importance of systemic analysis and the holistic approach that the report is suggesting, not working on the silo sector by sector in a silo mode, but I think the human development and human security, both of the concepts are giving us the perspective of people-centered, which doesn't care about the sectors. So I think this notion of systematic approach or transformation is also another very important suggestion from the report. And one final note is that we submitted a background paper helped by Dr. Oscar Gomez from the JICA Ogata Sadako Research Institute on how human security concept can supplement or complement the human development concept when you incorporate the sustainability into the discussion of the human development. And I think what we had emphasized was that we have to be very, very prepared for what's going to be coming up because of the climate crisis. So I think when we talk about the policy choices, we have to think about the mitigation of the climate change, but as well as the adaptation or preparing for the future crisis. So coming back to the COVID-19 crisis, I think one of the lessons we learned was that the preparedness or prevention is very, very important, because we knew this type of pandemic might be coming, and those countries who were prepared well, Vietnam or Taiwan, was able to address, were very, very well prepared and address the crisis situations very well. So I think that's one of the messages we should take to the climate crisis as well, so that we have to build a resilient society to deal with something that's coming up because of the climate crisis. So that's my first reaction to the report.
Great, thank you very much, Murotani-san. Having heard the Murotani-san and Pedro, I think we have the precious opportunity to have you in Tokyo virtually, and then there are a lot of your fans here who wants to ask directly to you the many questions. But since you are here, the first question who came up on this, the Q&A board is that human development that you are handling. What is the real, meaning of the human development with a concrete example, if you can give us an idea of a human development. And also you mentioned in your first suggestion that the role of education is critical. And then some people here also from the education background, education field, she's asking, what do you think is possible way to foster children's and the people's critical thinking in countries, schools where access to information is restricted, such as in our neighboring country, China, for example. So that is question around human security and access to education and information, linked, it's I'm a little bit demanding, linked with the human security that Japan put a huge importance on its diplomacy and the development policy since the 1994 HDR report written by your ancestors. Sorry about the wrong question, but over to Pedro.
No, Tetu, it's a very, very good question with some commentary already included in the question, which I appreciate very much. And let me first thank Ryutaro for the comments. They were very generous and kind. Thank you. Also for the good collaboration. Now, human security, as Director Yoshida mentioned, is not something new to us. In fact, our office introduced the concept. So since 2019, when we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the publication of the 1994 Human Development Report on Human Security, that our office has been reflected on the relevance of the concept. And we intend to deepen that reflection even more over the course of this year, because over time, and that's why the paper that was jointly produced by our office and JICA with Oscar Gomez was so important. We realized, and I'll come to your question, Tetsu, because this also links to the point about education. We realized that one of the key features of societies today is the fact that many people around the world feel a sense of lack of control over their lives. Now, this can be defined in different ways. One way can be to say that people feel insecure, that people feel a sense of lack of security. Now, this is not lack of security in the sense that a country is afraid that other will invade it or interfere in some way in its sovereignty, but it's in a way deeper than that. It's individual insecurity. Going back to Director Yoshida, to this notion that people are fearing not only poverty or their economic standing in society, but they're also suffering fear more broadly about their role in society, whether they are going to fit. This is important, this perspective, this idea of lack of control, to understand, for instance, the appeal, and this will be my bridge to the point about education, the appeal of, for instance, conspiracy theories. Now, we know that throughout human history, people have been attracted to conspiracy theories. Why? We know from psychology and sociology that when people cannot explain very well what's happening to them, they need to find some reason, some driver out there, some agency. I mean, agency not in the sense of institutional agency, but someone taking actions to harm them. And so there are other things that can be explained or accounted for if we take this view that people feel a lack of control over their lives. And so here education is obviously very important. And you see what we mean here by education. It's not education only in terms of giving people the means to learn math, to learn how to write. All of these are important. And it's not education only in the sense of enabling people to be economically productive, which is the perspective that you take when you care, for instance, about human capital. All of this is important. But education also matters, as I mentioned, because it gives people the ability to have this critical reasoning, this critical thinking, understanding what science is telling us, even when science is not very sure. And science itself has to learn and evolve. And we saw that very clearly when it came to the response to COVID-19, how as scientists learn more about this virus, then the guidance also evolved. So education is critical also to enable people to have more of this sense of security. To be able, once again, to have this critical reasoning. Now, in the 2020 Human Development Report, we emphasize more aspects related to a sense of stewardship for nature, understanding how we are dependent from nature. You know, many kids today, more than half of the population today in the world, lives in cities, in urban settings. So that connection with the natural world that was somehow a bit more present in rural communities is somehow detached, is being lost. As we live in industrialized societies, we don't know where our food comes from. So education in the sense also of instilling not only in children, but education applies to all ages, a better understanding and sense of how they are dependent on nature. So you see, in a way, Tetsu, how all of these concepts, the concept of human development and the approach that it takes to education, the concept of human security, and the times we're living through, the challenge of insecurity, lack of self-control, are in a way all interrelated. In the 2020 Human Development Report, we took on one slice, one angle, but in the future, we want to continue to explore the interaction between these three aspects. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Yeah, you're very precise about this human security empowerment aspect and the role of education, and then and to nurture the critical thinking of the children. It's very important. What is the reaction, Murotani-san, about this link of the human development, the human security from your side?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your question. I think the first thing I need to say is that we are all understanding that the human security and the human development are something like two siblings, and two concepts complement to each other. And if I can refer to Amartya Sen's column on the Commission on Human Security report, the human development is basically a concept that gives an upward thinking, how we can expand the capabilities or possibilities of human beings towards the better world. While the human security is looking at how we can be prepared or prevent the downside risks, which might happen everywhere, be it economic crisis, infectious diseases, natural disaster, or conflict or violence. So these two concepts are supplementing to each other. And I think when it comes to our attitudes towards the climate crisis, a human development concept gives us an idea on how we can better expand the people's capabilities while reconciling the development with the global environment. While on the human security side, I think we are more looking at the downside risks caused by the climate change. I think there are lots of more frequent natural disasters, the more severe natural disasters, how we can be prepared for those risks, or how we can prevent those risks. So I think, and it's a combination of protection and empowerment. So we have some roles to be expected from the government or the international community to protect the vulnerable population, while through the empowerment, we can expand the ability of communities or individuals to deal with those types of shocks. So I think the good combination of these two concepts makes us more resilient to the climate crisis as well.
Thank you very much, Ryutaro-san. Pedro, we got many questions, but the time is limited, so we only have 4 to 5 minutes remaining. Here, the critical question is that last year you issued a report on the inequalities. Today we have your report on the sustainability, planetary sustainability. And now the people all over the world, in Japan, the local community, local governments are fighting with the COVID threat every day. And then that shows, clearly the vulnerability of our existing community, which has to overcome many challenges to achieve the SDGs. We have 10 years SDGs action period now. So what is your suggestion about the direction that we have to move on from here, based on this Anthropocene Human Development Report, and also the future addressing the resilience issue from your perspective?
Thank you, Tetsu. That's a very difficult question, but I would say that, first of all, the SDGs remain more relevant than ever as an aspiration, definition of an aspiration, and in a way, that empty space that I spoke of high human development and low planetary pressures is what the SDGs are aimed at representing also. And as we all know, the SDGs incorporate a number of goals that relate also to the planetary processes that I spoke about. But what the SDGs don't give us is a sense of how to get there. So with these human development reports, we are trying to provide a sense of how to get there, which was the question you posed. And I would suggest that the 2019 Human Development Report and the 2020 are actually quite interrelated, in the sense that inequalities, as I also tried to suggest in my presentation, are really at the center of the challenges that we confront, both in terms of being exacerbated by shocks such as COVID-19. We don't have very good information yet, but we do know, for instance, that communities that have been historically marginalized and discriminated against are actually suffering disproportionately as a result of COVID-19. I gave the example also of gender inequality. So if I were to say what is the critical element that we need to look at, I would suggest that I would go back to this idea of inequalities in the sense of how we describe them in the 2019 Human Development Report, and also because they relate to this idea of lack of control, a loss of control that I alluded to earlier. In part because the planet will be fine no matter what. Biogeochemical cycles will balance. We might not be fine, and the rest of the life on the planet may not be fine, which also raises very difficult and new ethical questions. So I think those are the challenges that we need to confront, and inequalities once again lie at the center of both the drivers of this dangerous planetary change, as well as the fact that they are actually exacerbated when these new risks that I alluded to materialize in the form of shocks.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for responding to the difficult questions. The final word. So you are now facing many audience today at the 9 o'clock in the evening of Friday night. We have so many people involved in the business, maybe many CEOs, and then many engineers, many salespeople who are trying to capture SDGs and then trying to figure out their sustainability in their business. What's their takeaway tonight? Just one word. Murotani-san, Pedro.
I think one word is too difficult for me. So, and let me comment on the human security version 2.0, because I think for us it's very, very important. And one thing we are trying to do is not to change the concept of human security, but to revisit and recontextualize this concept in today's global situations. So I think the climate crisis is one of the biggest threats compared to 25 years ago, or the technology advancement gives us an opportunity and the threats compared to 25 years ago, and how JICA can adapt to these changes. That's what we are trying to do through the introduction of Human Security version 2.0. So that comes back to the question of Kondo-san, because I think what we understand, I think human security, human development, redefinition or revisiting of those two concepts, we understand that there are many, many more opportunities or technologies and partners out there to address new challenges. So there are lots of new challenges, but we also have new technology and new partners as well. So I think leveraging the technological innovations to a better way to expand the capabilities to achieve human development, or to better deal with downside risks to realize the real human security so that people can feel secured. would be very, very important. And for that, we ask your support, and we will come to you if you wish to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryutaro-san. Pedro-san, please.
Okay, I have two words: risk and valuation. Risk, because businesses cannot fool themselves. The way in which we're reporting financial disclosure is not mindful of this new category of risks that are related to planetary pressures. And there are very strong movements already taking place, for instance, in the context of central banks, the Network on Greening the Financial System, the Task Force on Climate Financial Disclosure that used to be chaired by Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, to put on the books the risks that we're facing. We are ignoring these risks, and this is an existential threat to many businesses. So risk. And secondly, valuation. We are not putting the value on nature. Nature is a huge asset. We are destroying it because we are not valuing it. So let's put also the value of nature in the books also of economies. Our measures don't account for natural wealth, natural capital. And here I would like to make a reference to the wonderful report that was issued early this week by the UK Treasury on the economics of biodiversity that was led by Professor Partha Dasgupta of the University of Cambridge. He has been working for many years on this idea that it's important to have a comprehensive view of wealth that accounts for physical wealth, human capital, but also by natural wealth. So risk and valuation. Thank you, Tetsu.
Thank you very much. Very precise and very action-oriented. Thank you very much. So thank you both, Ryutaro-san and Pedro from New York, for this excellent dialogue. And then I congratulate you again for this issue of HDR 2020. Thank you very much. And thank you for audience for your participation. Over to Yuko-san.
はい、皆様たくさんのご質問ありがとうございました。お時間の都合上、すべての質問にお答えすることができず、大変申し訳ございません。ご質問すべて記録しておりますので、後ほど改めてしっかり拝見し、今後の活動の参考にさせていただきます。それでは最後に、JICA 尾形貞子平和開発研究所前副所長を務められ、この2月より JICA 上級審議役に就任された武藤恵様よりお言葉をいただきます。武藤さん、どうぞよろしくお願いいたします。
どうもありがとうございます。ウェビナーにご参加の皆様、吉田様、コンセイソン様、室谷様、そしてすべての企画、アレンジを行ってくださいました近藤様をはじめとする UNDP の方々、ウィズコロナの今、ビルドバックベターですとか、グリーナーですとかが非常に強く意識されております。そういう折に、ヒューマンデベロップメントレポート2020という非常にタイムリーなご発表をいただき、皆で議論することができて、素晴らしい機会だったと思います。私はここ5年、欧州のクライメートの議論に参加したり、JICA でも主に地球環境や防災の分野に従事してまいりました。そこで感じておりましたのは、日本が尾形貞子さんのリーダーシップを引き継ぎまして提唱しております人間の安全保障と、クライメートですとかグリーン、それから地球のサステナビリティといった議論、それらの議論の間で対話が足りないのではないかということでした。しかし、今回、ヒューマンデベロップメントリポート2020が提示くださいました考え方のフレームワークをもとに、これからやっと人間、クライメート、または地球、そして経済成長、それらすべてをサステナビリティに向かう全員の行動変容という共通軸で議論ができるようになり、非常に画期的なことだと思っております。こ これから実際のアクションにどうつなげるか、ますます議論が盛んになることと思っております。JICA でも今後、人間の安全保障のさらなるバージョンアップの議論を続け、UNDP が主導されます国際条理での議論に参加していきたいと思っております。オーディエンスの皆様と一緒にぜひ盛り上げていきましょう。Over to you, 安田さん。
どうもありがとうございました。それではお時間となりましたので、これにて人間開発報告書2020の発表会を終了とさせていただきます。なお、後ほど皆様に簡単なアンケートをお送りさせていただきますので、お時間がありましたらご協力いただけますと、大変幸いです。今後も UNDP のウェブサイトやソーシャルメディアを通じて UNDP の最新情報を発信してまいりますので、フォローしていただけますと、嬉しいです。本日は誠にありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。